Thank you, Kaku, for not just laying the groundwork for entire musical tradition of India, other than just the tal aspect, which is just one of the aspects of it. So I'm glad that you covered so much more, because without that context, there's very little one can understand. Just throw out a bunch of beats and syllables out there.
Take it beyond.
So this is a great way for me to go in a little more into what Kaku was talking about. First of all, I'll play some music for you, and let's see if this makes any sense.
The two singers in the first video were Amir Khan Sahib, Ustad Amir Khan, and Pandit D.V. Balaskar, and the Raga was Deshituri.
That's it. That clip is, when I played this clip, I could look at people who listen to classical music, the back was sitting there, a musician there, was like, ah ha ha, but I completely recognize the fact that someone who has not heard this music is going, what is that? What on earth is going on? My point here is, it is an acquired taste, and it takes a little bit of learning to understand the intricacies of what has happened. What I was playing you was a clip of this incredible musician called Nivritti Bua Sarnaik, singing a pretty advanced raga called Kafi Kannada, and a very advanced kind of pattern within the structure of Tan. Now I'm going to break down all of this to you over the course of the next 3 hours. But to begin with, I said it's an acquired taste. What I mean by that is that, let's say you go to an art museum, you are looking at this beautiful painting of Monet or one of those great masters, and you appreciate it, you love it, and you're saying, this is such a beautiful painting. You're able to respond to it emotionally. But the moment you put on one of those headphones that they give you in museums these days, and they tell you a lot more about each piece of art that you're walking past, and they tell you that this is that it took so much effort to get this particular shade of paint which were not available in those days, how hard they had to work to get these textures, and this technique was invented by this person. There was nothing like this before. The moment you understand a little more about the piece of art, your whole understanding and appreciation of what you just are responding to anyway emotionally, it just becomes that much more vivid, that much more stronger. Your appreciation is that much more intense. And I think the same applies to music of any kind, especially a classical art music tradition that dates back centuries. This music developed, as we saw in some of those slides, over centuries and even millennia. We often hear Indian music has its roots in thousands of years and everything, which is true. It has its roots back then, but what we currently listen to as Indian classical music dates back to about, depending on what kind of music, I would say anything between 200 to 600 years. The concept of raga itself, we find evidence of that being kind of consolidated and clearly clarified in about 600 to 700 years ago. Is that correct, Babu?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the format of vocal music that we listen to called Khyal today is about 200 years old.
Actually, in his text called Brihadashi, Matangu Muni has clearly mentioned that the classical music that we hear today is actually Deshi Sangeet.
Yeah, so that's a very clear distinction which dates back. There is a folk music and there is a music that has, which is what I was just going to say. Classical music, the way we describe it, is any music that has scriptural background, anything that adheres to a set of rules, anything that adheres to a set of, here are these rules that you cannot break. Rules of raga, rules of format, rules of etiquette, there are many rules that a classical musician has to learn while being on stage. And then what makes it spectacular, to my mind, is that despite all those rules, it has infinite room for improvisation. We also hear that Indian classical music is all about improvisation, right? You've all heard that very often. So where does these two meet? I mean, it's a set of rules and rules and rules. You sing one phrase the wrong way, you're going to a different raga. One phrase this way, you're going to a different tal. But at the same time, there's ample room for improvisation. So over about 600 years ago, I think the concept of raga was clarified. I mean, it was there in different forms before, but I think it was clarified, well defined, and the fact that this is how it's going to be presented, of course, albeit in a Drupad genre, which is subgenre of classical music, came about 600 years ago. And over time, what we present today as vocal music is called Khyal music. The predominant form of Hindustani vocal music now is Khyal. So, if you look at Indian classical music as a headline right there and make branches out of that, you get South Indian classical, Carnatic, and Hindustani music. Then within Hindustani music, you get these three formats here, which is voice, instrumental, and percussion. And within voice, there are again several different we call them subgenres. One of them being what I sing predominantly, Khyal. Then there is Drupad, which is another older predecessor of Khyal music. And then there is another section called Thumri. So Drupad, Khyal, and Thumri, these form the three main umbrellas or titles within which all of our Indian classical vocal music falls under. All of these have raga as a common factor, which is why we refer to Indian classical music as Raga Sangeet, raga music. And when people ask me what I sing, many times I say Indian classical music is a very popular, familiar term, but I can also say I do raga music, or I'm a khyal singer, which is, if you know what khyal is, then you exactly know what I'm talking about. It's a very specific kind of music, whereas Indian classical music is a very broad term. So within khyal, now I'm going to divide the rest of the time that I have into three sections. I mean, one of them is already covered, kind of the history of the music, but I will very briefly touch upon a few more points. Then I will explain what exactly a raga is in little more detail than what you've heard before, and go into very quickly to the format of presentation, because that I think is the most relevant to audiences. When you go to a classical music concert, you want to know what it is that a musician is doing up there on stage. What is it that you're listening to, what to listen for, how to listen, and what to appreciate. Because I'm going to be singing here tomorrow, and I hope you all will come, and I want you to understand what I'm going to be doing on stage. Right? So, 200 years ago, in Gwalior is where Khyal music took its roots. Raga existed before that. And by raga, we mean a set of notes. It's a little more than a scale, quite a lot more than scale actually. We have a scale, we can have many ragas with the same scale, right? So what happens is, we have certain signature phrases called raga anga. Anga means a part. Sharir ka ang is a part of the body, so rag ka ang is a part of the rag. And what are these angs made of? Notes, obviously. Now, What distinguishes those notes from one another is there are two things. One is the movement of those notes, how those notes interact with each other, and very critically, very crucially, the timing of those notes, of those movements. Okay? So what makes a raga? Notes being sung or played in a very specific combination and in a very specific timing. These are two very important components of what makes a raga. I'm going to stop here and let you ask me any questions or any clarifications. If this is not very clear, please say so. I will explain a little more.
Can you define
Yes.
what you mean by combination?
Yes. Thank you. I was hoping that question would come. We're doing C, right? For the yeah. Yeah. So this is the sound of a tanpura. Tanpura is an instrument which you saw on the slide. It's a gourd with a pumpkin and two long, I'll bring them tomorrow. I'll have two of those playing with me in the concert. We have an app for everything these days. So this is the sound of a tanpura that's giving me the basis of my scale, sa and pa. It's too loud? Just wait till I start singing. Is it okay now? Sa pa. Now is the tanpura too loud? No. Now let's see. Sa re ga ma pa da ni. It's the 7 major notes. Sa re, the flat re, or the half note, or the komal re. So we have 7 major and the minor. Re, ga, ma, da, ni. These are the 7 Vikrat swaras we are called. They're not all minor. The 4th is augmented ma, right? So we call them Vikrat swaras, which means they're out of their usual form. So totally we have 12 notes. Now how do these notes interact with each other? There is a movement. And that movement is either upward or downward or just in one place. Re, ga, ma, pa. This is one of the downward movement. Re, upward. Ga, just static. Ma, pa. It goes up, down and straight. It's a combination of all of these. So these movements are called varnas. So one of the definitions of raga, as Kaka mentioned, was Ranjayati raga. A more technical definition is Yoyam Swaravisheshastu Swaravarna Vibhushita. That means those notes which are embellished with very specific, special Swaravarnas, which means movements. So it's either upward or downward or static or a mix of all of these. Correct? Now how do these notes move? Now we know which direction they are moving in with the varnas. Now how do they move? With something called alankars, embellishments. The most common embellishment without which our music would be dead is mead or gliding notes. Re, ni, pa, da, ma, re. All these movements, the gliding movement is called mead. Pa, ma, ga. This is called karn. Pa, ma. They are called burkis. Dha, called a khatka. So point being, there are very specific movements or embellishments that we learn as students. And then, when we get all of these, okay, now we know how we can use these notes, how we can embellish these notes, but then these are all still just loose notes. But when you actually give them a specific form, So the analogy I give when I teach my students very often is that these notes and these movements are like saying nose, eyes, mouth, cheeks, ears. But then each one of us has a very unique combination of these things. No two faces are exactly similar. We all have a nose, but my nose is very different from anybody else's noses here, and so are my eyes or my ears. Pa, re, same two notes, fifth of the second. Pa, re, pa, re, pa, re, pa, re. These are all pa, re movements from different ragas. Does that make it clear? When I said movement, each of these movements, the same two notes, but as I think it's a nose. Let's say pa re is a nose, and each of these different ragas has a different shape, and that's how it makes all of us different. The color, texture, shape, size of all of our features. Likewise, the notes. Pa da, pa da, pa ga, all different ragas. That is nice.
If I may draw a
Please,
comparison.
yes.
So if you think of, are people familiar with like piano music here and such? But like in Western music, it's a lot of Italian terminology, and so the way you connect the notes in different types of raga music is just like that character he's talking about. You can do it through like legato, which is the elongation of those notes, or staccato, which is the shorter. So each raga, you can think of it if it's simpler to think in those terms, then it's a very basic type of thought, but that's kind of how you connect the notes together, is by elongating or shortening, and then also ornamentation, just like you have in like piano music.
Yeah, that is universal to any kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
There will always be elongation and making short and embellishments of notes, regardless of which music in the world you go to. Right? They have different names. We call them alankars, we call them different something else. They have different names. But what makes this music unique in its way, in what is classical raga music, is that there are very specific movements that define that, give it a form and say this movement cannot be in any other raga. Like pare, this movement is Yaman and Yaman only. Pare, this cannot be any other raga, unless that other raga is an offshoot of this raga, or belongs to a family of a group of ragas that Yaman belongs to. Then you might say, okay, it's like saying, okay, this person looks just like that, they must be siblings, and they, yeah, that's my brother. No, you have some similarity, but it's not the same. So you will have common features within humans, you will have common features within ragas. At the same time, it's just not one phrase that makes a raga. It's a combination of several such features. Ni, re, ga, pa, re, ga, ma, ni, da, pa, re, ga, ma, pa, re, ga, ni, re, sa. This is what makes it Yaman. Now all of these phrases put together, individually, they're all soaked in Yaman. You can dip them in Yaman and say this is exactly Yaman. No other rag will have Yaman or these phrases, especially these phrases in this particular order. And then I sit on stage and I will change all of these phrases and orders, and that's what makes it art. That's what you learn over time. That's why it takes a long time to learn this art form of how, like I was saying, there is always a connection to the spiritual thought or the philosophy of a culture, right? When it comes to music, we always believe that the human body is limited, but what's within the human body is infinite. So the ragas are limited with their rules. You can, like I said, if you do this pari in a different way, you're going into territory of a different raga. You cannot do that. But within that, it's just like our body is so limited, and but the possibilities within are infinite. There's crazy things that the mind does. Similarly, it's one rag being sung by thousands of musicians over 200 years, and even now, if someone starts singing it, it has the same freshness to it. How is that even possible? Think about it. The same Yaman, same Bhageshri, same Malka, someone sits now in 2023. This has been sung for over 200 years, 500 years, some of these ragas. And they're still bringing the same joy, the same freshness of emotion. It stirs something very real in everybody who's listening to it.
Not only that, if you sing Yemen at 15 and then you sing Yemen at 50,
It's a big difference. Yeah. It grows with the person. Yeah. And not just me. I mean, here's another thing, right? I sing the same raga, and 5 people from the audience will come and say something to me about what they felt, which will be completely different from maybe even from what I was thinking when I was singing. One person comes and says that was so deeply emotional. Other person comes and says it was so romantic and so colorful. Other person comes and says, it was so scholarly and so intense. Same performance.
so subjective.
It is very subjective.
And that's what makes it also universal, that it's everyone's music.
Can you talk a little about, or talk a little bit about how raga and time works? Like, what time of day do you do certain
yes.
ragas? Like Yaman.
Yes, so this is a very, again, topic that is debated a lot. And I have certain thoughts about it, which I will share with you. The ragas have certain time durations allotted to them, certain such as evening, morning, afternoon, even seasonal ragas, monsoon ragas, and spring ragas, and all of that. Now, some people believe that these are absolutely, there's something magical about this, that the composers who compose these ragas must have felt something about that time of day. There's something, that vibration of that raga that affects everything around it. There's all of that, which may be true. I can't say no to that. But in my experience, I have felt that if a raga was certainly supposed to be, if it has something metaphysical about it in its notes that make it a morning or evening raga, everybody should be able to feel that. If I play Darbari Kannada to somebody or Bhairav to somebody and say, what time of raga is this? If that person has not heard Indian classical music or does not know what time of raga that belongs to, they will not know. If I play a raga to all of you and say, is this a morning or afternoon raga, you will all maybe guess. But there's no way to say that you will all feel, okay, this is a morning raga for any particular reason. I have tried this on many over the last 20 years and people have not been able to tell whether it is morning or afternoon raga. But when I listen to Bhairav, I definitely feel the morning. Why? Because it's a matter of conditioning. From the time I was 5 years old, I was told that Bhairav is a morning raga. I was told that Darbari is a midnight raga. And everybody who has learned this music grows up with that deep, deep, deep conditioning. And we all absolutely feel that. When I listen to Miyaki Malhar, there's no question in my mind that I can feel the monsoon. But if I play that rag and you don't feel it, or somebody else walking on the street, if I play this rag and say, do you feel the rain? And they say, what are you talking about? That means it's not universal. So I hesitate to give it a metaphysical, connotation of some kind and say that there is something to do with the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is big. I mean, there's tales that people have sung ragas and brought rain. I mean, we know it takes a lot to bring rain. Not one person can, yes.
So between these rules, conditioning and creativity, what decides or defines the popularity or success of that combination?
Yeah, of popularity or success of the combination, I will come to that in a bit. I will, if I may just address the time thing. Why do I still adhere to time? I very much adhere to time allocations in my own performances. I respect it for 2 reasons. One, I feel that there is a progression that goes into it. So to explain what time theory is, for those of you who don't know, it's not as simple as saying every raga has a certain time. They say that ragas with the flat second and the flat sixth are usually sung at dawn and dusk. They're called twilight ragas or Sandhi Prakash ragas. And then you move on to ragas which have sharp, like major second and major third. Then you move on to ragas which have minor third, Komal Gandhar. Then you move on to ragas that have a very strong Shuddh Madhyam, or the fourth. Yeah? So there's a very clear progression of how, what raga follows what. There is a Komal Rishad Dhaval, like in the morning we sing Bhairav ragas, Ramkali, Bhairav, all of these ragas, followed by Bilawal family ragas which have all major notes. Then we go into ragas like Jaunpuri which have the minor third, and then we go to Sarang varieties which have the strong Madhyam. Then we go to the evening again, Sandhi Prakash, we go to Purvi Thad ragas which are the Komal Re and Komal Da, minor second and sixth. Then we go to the major notes which are like Yaman and all of these. The only difference being in the evening ragas, we have the augmented fourth. Okay? And then we go back to the Komal Gandhar ragas, and then the Shuddh Madhyam, the fourth being strong like the Malkamos, Bhageshri, so have you. And then again we go back towards Sohini and Basant in the middle of the night and then into the morning. So this is the progression of just note-wise what comes after what. So I think it was a more purely aesthetic choice or a recommendation that became a tradition. And it's true, in my experience I've found, I don't know, this is conditioning, but I've asked several musicians this, why would you not sing Purya Dhanashri or a Marwa after singing Yaman or Kedar? And the constant answer I've got is that after singing like a Yaman or something, if you sing a rag with Komal Re, it kind of dulls down the concert. But if you sing, when you sing a Komal Gandhar rag or Kafi Thad rag, it's something that uplifts it, mood-wise.
Correct.
Let me just finish this thought. So this is what people from their experience of people I've spoken to, and just from a performance perspective, right? Not from any other thing. Why would you perform this not after this and not this after this? They said it kind of dulls down and we want to lift it up. So you move in that progressive order of what comes after Yaman, you go to Kafi Thad ragas or Nan, and then you go into your Malkamos, etc., and then you go to Darbais. There is a progression to that. Now, so one reason is that there is like I was just saying. Second reason why I still adhere to ragas and their time is because there is some magic in that. There is some beauty in that. It is art after all. And if I am sitting on stage and singing Shri and I have dusk and this beautiful sunset in my mind, and somewhere in the corner of my mind, because I know that it's an evening raga, and if there are 500 people sitting in front of me listening to this raga and they all have the same beautiful, that impression of an evening in their minds, we're kind of all feeling a certain common thread that binds whatever music is going on here. And there is some beauty in that, right? So that is my take on ragas and time theory. It could be different. I'm sure there are many different other answers to this question. And Bhatkande, the person who kind of fixed this and kind of explained that this is the time theory and this is how the 8 praharas go and everything, he clearly said this is just an observation. It's not a rule. I'm not saying that this is when it has to be sung. I'm saying this is when people sing it. Correct? And it is sung in this particular order, so this is where people sing it. And based on that, he created this concept of Vadi and Sambadi. He said, you observe that most evening ragas have a very strong note in the first half of the octave. And the most morning ragas tend to have a strong note in the second half of the octave. It's just an observation.
Yeah. Sure. Bhatkandeji's books or writings are basically documentations of what prevailed during his time or before him. I remember there was one radio interview by Pandit Ravi Shankar from broadcast from Cuttack radio station in eastern part of India. He was very young at the time. He said, no, this raga time theory doesn't make any sense to me. And but we never heard him playing a morning raga in the evening concert.
Exactly.
Samarth also is saying that. Next point I would ask is that someone is returning home from an overnight job. Will that person be able to understand the freshness of a bird waking up at 5:30 in the morning? Perhaps not. So this music is closely connected to nature, and we as humans have lost that connection. This time theory was based on observation of the changes that happens in nature.
That's one theory, by the way.
Yeah, and then also human body. Sometimes there is an argument that what if I'm inside a studio or in a closed room where there is no daylight, but we still have our body, which is connected to the day cycle, seasonal cycles. Nature clearly recognizes and articulates these changes that happen. And these are all, once again, connected to the sun, the position, its movement, and all of that. The frequencies and vibrations we chose to make this music and embodied in the scales or modes or ragas, they have, according to human observations, certain relationships with those different elements and conditions in nature. And that's how they put these notes together in the given formats that we get. Another aspect, from my personal experience, I would say that when we listen to music, I would say 95% of that time we are shielded. This is the defense mechanism we inherited from our ancestors. We are always shielding ourselves. In very frail and fragile moments, when those shields fall off, these frequencies get an opportunity to penetrate into our body and touch and stir up the cells. Human body, as we know, 90% almost is made of water. And we know we have come through some scientific research how frequencies or vibrations react on fluid. So these are some other thoughts that I wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. But I'm just saying that I hesitate to act now because we don't have anything to suggest that as a raga has to be sung at a certain stage and it was composed for that reason to be sung at that stage at that particular time of day or night. We don't have anything to suggest why that might have happened from any scientific. No experiment has been created on that, and the only anecdotal experiment that I have is when I ask people, do you think this is morning or evening or night raga? They have no clue. So
because they are not listening.
Maybe, but they are listening.
Pretending to.
No, they're listening.
Or maybe making
No, that's you. I mean, it's like gaslighting, saying no, you're listening, but you're not listening. That's not fair. You are listening.
No, basically, that shield mechanism that we use, we carry with us all the time, doesn't allow those frequencies. How often have you really been? Because sometimes we see these days they are putting a patient into complete sedation before surgery and playing music in the operation theater. The patient has no capacity to resist to that, and we see their body being touched and responding to the music. Blood pressure is coming down, and they are
No question that humans respond to music. I'm not saying we don't have responses
not
to music.
always the way it should.
No, that's subjective again, but I'm saying that we do respond to music in our own way. Like I said, everybody has their own subjective way of responding. Somebody finds romance in it, somebody finds something else in that listening. Well, I mean, we can disagree on that, but I just feel that it's not fair to tell somebody that, oh no, you're not listening, when they're actually say, this is, your perception is not complete. I just feel that it's kind of it's not fair on them at that point of time. And maybe in the future, if we have any research that suggests that this raga being sung at another time is harmful or doesn't do full justice, then sure, I mean, we can wait for that to happen. But until that, we have a perfectly logical explanation, which is what sounds good after a certain, if I'm starting a rag at a certain time, what comes after that? If we have a kind of a roadmap or a suggestion or a recommendation of ragas based on this time theory that this sounds nice after this sounds nice after this, from a performance perspective, because I have sung Shri when as a student practicing morning, night and afternoon. I have just felt the same intensity while singing that raga. Whether I've been doing that very morning, night, afternoon, at any point of time when I was a student, when I was learning, I would delve deep into it and the world around me would look like that raga. Everything in my world was like as though that raga was coloring everything. It didn't matter if it was afternoon or night at that point. So it makes me wonder if it's it's only a performance thing rather than in training or practice we don't adhere to that as much. So we can, like I said, there are many different theories to it, different philosophies on this as well. But coming to the next your subject about the popularity of ragas, is that what your question was?
Or what makes it feasible or more like people are interested in?
No one knows. Nobody knows that. It's a question of time. I think from time to time there were certain ragas that were popular about 100 years ago that are not popular anymore.
But if there's a Bollywood song on that raga,
Sure, maybe a pop song in that raga will kind of make it popular. But other than that,
it's a lot.
within the classical musical tradition, every 100, I'd say every 30, 40 years, we see emergence of a new set of ragas being within this. It's not like these ragas ever vanished; they were there. But there was a time when suddenly everybody was singing Kirwani and Shivaranjani and all of those ragas. Those ragas are slowly kind of dwindling now. You again see a resurgence of ragas that were sung before that. People are singing more of Marwa, Shri, Dodian, all the major ragas. There was a time when nobody was singing Bhairav. Everybody was singing Charukeshi and other variations of different kind of. So I think it goes through cycles. And Dr. Ashok Ranade also had said this in one of his lectures that.
Maybe I should ask the question a different way.
Please.
Then why have the rules or the conditioning?
The rules of raga. See, there are two different things. One is the popularity of ragas. What ragas are popular at any given point of time. That's one thing. Conditioning is something that we are conditioned to multiple things in life, from from listening to the news to everything, what kind of food we like to eat. Some people say, no, I don't like to eat Italian food. I don't like to eat. Why? Because we have preferences. Everybody has preferences. It's all a question of conditioning. So music is no different from that. So I think conditioning happens regardless of what activity it is. And rules of a raga, I think, are very different from the popularity of it. So rules of a raga is which I think we should get into quickly in two aspects, which is what are those rules and how do they manifest in actual performance?
And actually, before you do, I just want to kind of to your point and also what Samarth said. So it is, just like in Western music, you have popularity of certain genres of music that, cycle through, right? And so like now you have like top 40, things like that, more pop music. But really what makes music interesting, and I talk about all music, is, the three concepts we're talking about today, which is like your rhythm, your vocal or your musical composition, the instrumentation. And so these are the things that, again, subjective, right? Various people listen to various types of music, but that's what, with ragas, it's just like that too. They create a mood, kind of what the gentleman in the front was speaking to before, like, the scales we have in ragas are also analogous to modes in Western music. And so, like we were talking about Raga Yaman, which has an augmented fourth, which is, Western music, very simplest terms is mixolydian, right? But, the way you perform the raga is really what will draw, you as a listener in, and everyone will have a different opinion on it.
Yeah, so the rules of the raga, to very quickly go into some of them, or let me just explain more than rules. I would just say, how do you, first of all, ragas, actually we spoke about Ang, I think we should leave it at that. I'll go to format of presentation, is that okay? Yeah. Do you have any other questions so far? I think format is better. Yes, please.
Coming to the modern day, and when artificial intelligence comes along, and the rules that we are talking about for the raga, which it seems to me came along by strong personalities, not by consensus or regulatory body. So in the new milieu, when AI comes along, who's going to be deciding that these are the rules that must never be changed or could be permutated? What are you feeling about it?
Excellent question. I just read a hashtag this morning that said AI has no baggage. Because art comes from a lot of baggage that we humans bring,
Very true.
right? And there's no way AI can generate any of those things. But as far as rules and structure is concerned, yes, there might be something new that comes up. But AI is all about, thankfully we don't have sentient AI, artificial intelligence anymore yet, right? It's not sentient yet. There is still, it's a question of learning. Machines are learning.
For the
And-
time being.
For the time being, yes, and for the foreseeable future, I would say, at least for the next, I don't know, I don't want to predict that. I'm not an expert on the subject.
I think you're wrong there. So there is already AI that can generate songs.
There is, but it's
also video,
of course,
music.
art,
That's
paintings.
music. Exactly.
Yes, but that is all based on machine learning. It is not based on its own intelligence. There is no sentient intelligence. That is a fact. It is based on machine learning. It has acquired tremendous amount of data from all that there is, and from based on that, it is, if you say create this piece of art for me, it will create something for you. Sure, but it is all based on machine learning. So if I were to feed in hundreds and thousands of hours of music into a machine and say learn this music, let's go through the format of this music, maybe it will understand that music and come up with something. So that there is something, and this format I'm talking about, there are rules. You think this hasn't changed over the last 100 years? Of course it's changed. So it doesn't require an artificial intelligence to change it. Human intelligence itself is changing it. It's a natural process, right? So it will change. There's nothing we can do about it. And we just have to wait and watch, I suppose. We have changed. Our music has changed over the last 100 years. I will give you a few examples. Kako is here, so if you can do Balavan. Yeah. Yeah. This is how I sing this composition today. And listen to how this composition was sung 100 years ago. what I originally started off with, what we do now. Holy jump.
So paradoxical because we have sped up and the takers have
Yeah.
slowed down. In the contemporary times, you just have the time.
Right? I mean, life is sped up, is what he's saying. We're all moving in double, like cartoon speed, as they say right now. But the speed of the teka at which this music is happening has actually slowed down over the last 100 years. It's incredible. So this change has happened in the lifespan of 2 generations. My guru's guru used to sing in this tempo, and today we are singing in this much slower tempo. That's a change. So why wait for AI?
I also, I noticed something else too. So if you noticed the 2 variations that Samarth sang, the first one, it's also evolution in like where you're singing from, right? And so sometimes you bring your voice from either your gut or your chest, through your nasal passage. And so what I noticed the first time when you sung, that it was more guttural. It was there was more, you felt more of that deep, the lows in your voice. Whereas, and that's very trendy now, right? But whereas when you sung it from your group,
Yes.
it was more, there was more air coming through your nasal passage. And at the time,
It's a
that was
different
the style.
aesthetic. Yeah.
That was the style.
True. I mean, if you listen to older recordings, there was a certain, I mean, they had beautiful voices, but there was also a certain indifference to voice production in a lot of musicians.
The breath.
The breath, yes. They had long breath spans, and the voice production, the tone of the voice was not that much important as compared to the content of the music that you brought. You will listen to a lot of music. I can play, I mean, we don't have too much time, but actually musicians sing like this. I mean, when I was 8-10 years old, I remember picking up a cassette from a cassette shop and taking it home and playing it, and I took it back saying this is spoiled. It's a true story, I'm not even kidding. And that the person who played it says, no, this is perfectly fine. I said, what do you mean this is okay? It can't be. I thought that it was actually, I'm not even kidding. But then as I grew up, I listened to that music and I was like, wow, how can somebody even conceive of that designing of that each cycle is just so incredible, the way he's thought of that and he's conceiving of it as it goes. It's impossible to emulate that even, unless you've really gone and taken training from that musician. It's so deep and beautiful. That's why I said I started off by saying it's an acquired taste.
Acquired taste, exactly. And
So-
the same thing happened with me. First time I got exposed to Fayaz Khan's music. Out of tune, it sounded.
Yeah,
It took me 15-20 years to recognize those tones.
it's true. There was a Yaman recording which I listened to when I was in Bombay as a student when I was maybe 16, 17, and I listened to it once and I was like, get it away. Like terrible voice throw and everything, and it sounds like an old man lugging a cart or something like that, And then much later, when I went to Calcutta and I was studying this with Guruji University there, and he gave me the same recording. He said, I wanted to listen to this for 1 month every day.
Why? You were listening earlier.
I listened to it as a child. I listened
Why?
to it not as a child, like a good 5-6 years ago. I listened to it, but then when he gave me, he didn't know that I had listened to this before.
There's
He
always
just-
a difference in the quality with it. Yes,
Right.
you remember you were groomed by him, Vijay Kichku. He was a college student when he first time heard Fayaz
Yes.
live concert. And the man was wearing his turban and all the medals and all of that, and with the big mustache and all of that. No tenderness in his character. And he's singing, and then this young man of 22, he doesn't know why tears are rolling down his eyes.
Right? That's the beauty of art. That's what it is. So, bringing it back to the realm of structure.
Hey, we need 2 days.
Right? Really quickly. What happens in a performance when you go to listen to a concert? In a khyal performance, I will go by, again, there are different gharanas, different styles, and I'll go by the most common format. The singer opens with a very short introduction of the raga, just to let you know what I'm going to sing, right? And nowadays we do a full explanation of what I'm going to sing. So it's a raga, and so this composition, and I mean, if you have an audience that knows the music well, you don't even have to do that. But the way you kind of get everybody to build the mood around it is just. Everyone knows this is Bahar. You're all on the same page now. We're going to sing Bahar, right? That's this one phrase. Raga rules. This signature phrase. Now, did any one of you feel I was singing out of tune here? But this is not a standard note. This is neither sharp nor the flat knee. This is not ga, it's flat ga. Ga is the sharp regular major ga, but ba ba ga ma is neither. This is what he was talking about, that we've lost that those microtones because of various reasons. I mean, this fastness of life, and we have a more standard instrument in the harmonium which are just not capable of bringing those microtones out. But as soon as I sing something like this, you have the rag structure in front of you. This one phrase, gamani dani sa ni sa, this phrase and that particular intonation of nishad and gandhar tells you this is Bahar. So I sing that one phrase and now you know, okay, this is the rag that's coming up. Then I will sing the composition. Now when I say composition, as opposed to a Western classical composition which the entire piece is composed, here the composition will be over in 1 minute or less. Because the composition itself is just one cycle or two cycles. And then everything else is about how I develop that composition. That's where the improvisation comes. So it takes a Vilambit composition. The Vilambit is a slow tempo composition. It takes days and days to learn a composition the way it's exactly supposed to be sung. Now bear in mind, these compositions were composed about 200, 300, 400 years ago, and they still continue to be sung exactly the way they were sung back then. Some exceptions which have been, there are some words which we kind of sometimes don't know what they actually are, because they over generations the guru has sung something to the student and there was no question of asking the guru, hey, what is that word? There was no way you could ask. So they would just imbibe learn those compositions, and they had to learn it exactly the way it's sung. But over time, those compositions have come down several generations down to us, and we sing it. We spend extraordinary amount of effort mastering those compositions exactly the way it is sung, and then we go about changing it. So the next stage is to sing that same composition, giving it our own little twist. For example, I'll do this with the Madhya level, the medium tempo composition, so that it doesn't take that much long. We sang Desh the other day with Bhai, so I'll sing the same.
Give me a clue which tal, answering your question. I'm just naturally picking up the tal and the sum and the delineation of the teka.
You asked a question there about how do you know what beat this thing starts from. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I just started the composition and
I
based on the structure of the composition, Bandish composition is, what is a bandish? A composition. We call it a bandish because it's something that's bound together. Three elements are bound together: raga, tal, and lyrics. Exactly how I will start, my guru will start, his guru will start, etc. Okay? Then I do this is my improvisation based on this in that composition. Okay? So this is the next thing you will observe in a composition. They will sing the composition first, and then they will start improvising on that composition. They'll start tweaking some little bit here and there, but the structure will still kind of, you can see the same shape of the composition. Then here comes the improvisation in a section called Alap or Vistar. This is the meat of the music lies here really. You know, the actual essence of the music. Because I'm going to now explore various alleys of this raga. Squeeze out every ounce of emotion that I could get out from that raga, from every phrase that raga has. Na, ma, re. These are the notes. Signature of this. Na, came back to the mukda, the composition, right? So, in the composition, the first part, the starting of the composition is called a mukda, which means face. So, I am looking at this raga through the face of that particular composition. That raga, every composition gives me a different face of that same raga. This is the same raga, but a completely different angle. This, right? Or it could be Holi Khelan ko chale kanhaiya, Holi Khelan ko chale kanhaiya. Totally different composition, the same raga.
And
now,
the swing is also different.
So when I start developing this, I can't go into my own des chamber and develop it. I have to develop it from the lens of that raga. That's what makes it beautiful. So when you go to the next concert, pay attention to all these things. Opening alap, introduction, composition, slight tweaking of that composition, and then elaborating the rag through the lens of that composition. So what that means is that I will take an idea, develop it, but I have to come back to exactly where the cycle starts. And that's the beauty, that's where the skill of a good musician comes in. How you can go to all different kinds of places and then yet bring it back bang on time, seamlessly, without looking like you've hurried, rushed through. I'll give you a few examples of botched coming back, right? So if I'm singing, or let me take another composition. We'll go back to Chameli Phuli Champa. Okay?
In the meantime,
Yeah.
can I draw your attention to two extraordinary kids present in the front row
Yeah.
of this auditorium, this guy and the lady?
Congratulations.
Unbelievable attention.
This is a very difficult art form, and I'm really happy to see that you're listening. Now you don't know what the tal this is. You don't know this rag. But can you tell where I'm starting the composition? That's the mukda or the face. See, I come back to this motive at the end of every cycle or every 2 cycles. So if I don't do that right, developing an idea. that was not okay because I didn't have enough time to come back to the sound, to the downbeat, to this, right? So this shows you that it might all seem like I'm nicely floating around in tal, but no. Every phrase that I'm singing is connected to what's going on here.
What if you smile afterwards? That's how it was meant to be.
That is Miles Davis, right? He said no note is a wrong note. It all depends on what you do after that note. So yeah, so basically coming back to the point, it seems very easy when you listen because it's not to scare the children here. It's easy when you do it. But my point is, when you listen to it, it sounds easier than it actually. You need to learn it. It's not unlearnable. It definitely it's something every one of you can do. But it takes a little bit of training and understanding because this concept of this speed is going on by itself. And I hope you appreciate this the next time you go to a concert and you see that the musician is doing this alap and you feel like he's all nicely floating around, but no, he's connected to tal. And at the end of every cycle, seamlessly, beautifully, calmly, they come and bring it back home. And then they start another idea of the raga. And that goes on and comes back home. The cycle of every avartan goes on and on and on. And in that, the crescendo is built up. Slowly and steadily, it goes higher and higher to higher notes. And this tempo increases, not of this tempo. He will stay as is, but my speed of development will increase. And I will go into, yes,
While on the subject, even while singing alap,
yes,
there is an element of lie in that.
absolutely.
So, could you slightly elaborate?
Oh yeah. Holy Cham.
About the lay, which I forgot to touch upon, which is I did briefly on the three broad levels of laya, tempo, which normally we refer to laya as tempo, but that's not the actual meaning of the word. We talk about slow, medium, fast, and all of that. In the actual definition of laya, it is observance of the intervals between the beats.
It's time.
And then the next word we got out of that is called layakari, which is layakriya, how you interpret those intervals. So the breakdowns and the microtones. But eventually, through the practice, proper practice of the tal, it happens with Samarth also. He may sing a raga, but don't remember the name of the raga.
No.
It happened to, it will happen,
That's
it will
That's
happen.
happened. Just kidding.
It's a little,
I'm just joking.
it happens. There have been many occasions when Ustad Ali Abba Khan sir went on stage. He promised to mention the name of the raga, and then he came back without doing that. Then the organizers requested him to announce the name of the raga. He said, don't worry, I will do it next time, before the second half, before grade second. And then they asked, he was on the stage, and then he's looking at his tabla accompanist from the Chorapinchudi. What raga did I play? So the names don't matter. Those are given. What we are living with, in terms of the tala also, is the laya, not the breakdown, not the staccato version of time. And that's how we learn to live in the early part of our lives and the last part of our lives. It's ultimately life.
Yeah. So the alap section that you were asking about, I will just very quickly demonstrate that. Holy Cham. So even the phrases of alap, Chame. If you notice, the leaf fell on a beat. Chapa Gola. So there is always a connection to every single beat that is going on. If that's not there, the music sounds all kind of distorted and out of place. If you have to keep it tight, then it has to be connected to the leg. Okay? And then we go to faster combinations which are called tans. This kind of movement is called tan. So from alap we move into pehlava, and tan, which is this fast movement, and then we switch it to a faster tempo composition, drut tempo composition, drut lay, which is madhya lay or drut, which is fast tempo, and in that you get a chance to showcase your prowess of vocal tankari and all of those things, and lyrical content and all of that. So again, gamak.
Gimmick.
Gamak, okay, gamak is a kind of alankar again, it's a kind of embellishment. Just like mean, like the glided movements and khatkas and burkis. A very unique feature of Hindustani rag sangeet or khyal music or vocal music in general, in Indian vocal music, is the gamak, which is a very abdomen, chest kind of a movement. This kind of movement. It can be very strong gamak. This is also gamak. You can't hear the note, but I'm actually singing a note there, I promise you. Like ga. This is also a kind of gamak. But also in tan, pada baba gama re gama ba gama re. So if I sing it like this, this is flat kind of movement. I can use it intensely if I want to do it, sure. But that's not the technique of tan. It has something called gamak. Here is where we get to play. That first recording I played for you, if you notice there were these this is called bal. He's giving emphasis on different points. Tan is a whole different subject in itself, where it's not just one series of fast notes, but within a tan, every cycle you will hear the singer taking a different kind of tan, a different kind of pattern, a different kind of style, a different level of gamak, all of these things. Okay, so I hope that kind of covers the format of khyal presentation to a reasonable extent, given the time. I think we've already overshot, but if you have any quick questions, yes.
Time to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
They tell me, that there are like 10 thoughts,
Oh yes.
and the ragas that you base on these thoughts are like 5 swars or more. 5 or more, maybe, because if you have less than that, maybe you cannot have the variation that you need. And that raga combination should be such that it should sound good to the brain, Now, the question is, somebody may think that certain combination of those swaras is sounding good to somebody else it may not be, and based upon that there could be lots of different ragas. They tell me there may be 60 or 70 ragas. Now they tell me there are 500 ragas. They tell me there are 4,000 different ragas, and new ragas are coming out every so often. So who decides that? And if there are so many ragas, it's going to take a whole lifetime to understand.
Yes.
Learn more.
Yes.
You can say a couple
So
of
there are multiple points to this question, which I will literally try and answer within 1 minute because of time. Tat, it's a whole different subject. Raga classification, about 100 years ago, Bhattacharya said we need to classify and kind of put these ragas into certain boxes. Before that, there was no Tat system, right? Ragas were ragas. And he found that we can group these ragas in 10 different groups. Now that is one kind of classification. There are 2 kinds of classification of ragas that go hand in hand. One is Tat classification, which only looks at what notes are in that raga, such as all major notes or only minor second, minor second and minor sixth. All the ragas that have this combination of notes will be grouped into one Tat. Okay, so that is a Tat. It's purely a classification method, that's all. The other way of classifying ragas was based on rag ang. Like I mentioned, what an ang was, a particular phrase that has a timing and everything. So if you, for example, pa ga ma re sa, this particular movement has a name. It's called Kannada. Ni pa ga ma re sa. Any rag that has this movement is called a Kannada. That's one way of classifying. So there is this classification and the notes that raga uses. Both put together, you put these ragas in different groups. That is one part of your question. That is what a thought is. Now, what popularity of ragas? Yes, there are mathematically. If you look at thoughts and the rule that there have to be at least 5 ragas in the raga, there are about 48,000 ragas that are mathematically possible, but that's not aesthetically possible. So, if you actually look at convention, at any given point of time, I think there are about 150 ragas that are in vogue. Like I was saying, these ragas keep changing. Every 30-40 years, we see a new set of ragas being popular and some going out of popularity, and then another set comes. That's just a constant churn, and that musicians and audiences mutually kind of decide, and this goes organically. But I think at any given point of time, about 150 to 200 ragas are in practice.
That's more reasonable than thousands.
There are thousands maybe, but they might not be.
But then there are other rules also. That factorial will be smaller because there has to be work out for one of them.
Exactly, there are many rules. There have to be at
next
least.
to each other for the budget.
Correct.
So that comes down.
There are many other rules, like minimum 5 rules. They have either the 4th or the 5th from the octave, the ma or the pa. One of the two has to be there in the raga. And you can chromatic scale. There are very few exceptions that have chromatic notes. You had one question?
Yeah, one observation and a question. It seems like what we, in our terminology, we were predominantly in this session singing what we call mixolydian, and I feel like you're singing like a microtonal note between the major and minor 7, but it's kind of mixolydian sounding. I think that's what I'm hearing. Can you repeat the morning, midday, evening progression of the notes?
Sure.
Did you say sharp 5 or sharp 4?
Sharp 4.
So, okay, when there is a sharp 4, would that go with a minor 3 or a major 3? Because that's a very...
That depends.
Does it depend?
Yeah, there's many ragas with both, yes. There are ragas with minor 3 and major 3.
But with the sharp 4?
With the sharp 4 as well.
Because that's a real big change.
Yes. Sa re ga ma da ni sa ni da ba ma ga re sa, and sa re ga ma. Yeah, they both exist. They're both very popular ragas. Puryadanashri, Purvi, and other is Todi. So to reiterate that progression, usually twilight starts with flat 2nd and flat 6th, and then it goes into a major scale after that, where all notes are major. Re and both 2nd and 3rd are major. Then you have the flat 3rd that kind of peeps out, and then ragas that have very strong 4th. Solid 4th, madhyam, those ragas come about, and then this cycle kind of continues.
Okay.
That's a very broad, it's not like a rule, it's just an observation. So obviously there's many different exceptions to this and all that, but it's just a... Yeah.
Any other questions?
Maybe we just differentiate thought from Nagarkar in the Carnatic system.
Oh, no, that takes me 3 hours. I will let Anirbandha take the stage now. And
You are asking us to differentiate between dosa and tandoori roti and naan.
Yes.
Last question, what piece of advice you give to budding vocalists?
For budding vocalists, I will give very simple advice. Listen to a lot of music. Because it's sanskar is very important. So practice, of course, everyone tells you practice. For sure, practice as much as you can. I'll give you 2 pieces of advice. Don't let guilt get the better of you. People keep telling you to practice, you don't practice, don't feel guilty about it. Okay, do your best and practice as much as you can. Stay positive about it and listen to music every day. Active listening and passive listening. Your parents know what I mean by that, I guess. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a comment. I think the human voice is really amazing to be able to
Okay,
hit
so our
all
next performer,
Just wait.
reminded me of a blues singer that can hit all the microphones.
Yes, just wait till he comes and shows the same thing on his instrument. But I know what you mean. I appreciate that.
Not every human voice.
It takes practice, it takes training, but of course, yes, it is phenomenal. I appreciate that. Thank you.
thank you, Samarth.
Thank you.
da da